G'day, ZiggyD here, and in this video I want to share a guide to my Gun Mage build in Wolcen now that I've gotten stuck into Endgame and have reached the mid-level 50s. This build takes advantage of some of the most effective ways of scaling damage in the game, whilst maintaining survivability without too much investment. It's also built around a hybrid attack spellcasting playstyle, which I think is just one of the areas that Wolcen really sets itself apart in. This build works around the principle of using spells to spend wisdom to generate rage, and then weaving in powerful attacks to spend that rage, thus generating more wisdom again. This way you'll never have to use a resource generator, default attack, or invest much at all into resource maintenance, all the while being able to put out some incredible burst damage. The content you're seeing in the background is fully buffed endgame expeditions with enemies above my level, and we just shred. And it's been that way ever since I really started to figure out how to make the build work well in Act 2. We engage packs with the incredibly powerful Anomaly spell to group them up, apply debuffs, and burn down most trash mobs. We can also cast Bulwark of Dawn to provide a healing field, which later sticks to our character whilst also damaging nearby enemies and buffing our resist and attack damage. Once our rage is built up from casting spells, we can dump it into the incredibly powerful Havoc Orb with the missile modifier, and with the added projectiles we have burst down packs, elites, and bosses very quickly. Arctic Spear is a projectile spell we can spam while moving to kill monsters and spend our willpower, and what really makes it shine is that it can seamlessly weave in between our attacks and other spell casts, so long as we hold the button down. This gives a ton of extra damage output, whilst constantly spending willpower to generate more rage. It's really beautiful how it's all come together, and it's an extremely fun and punchy playstyle. So, let's go behind the scenes so I can explain how it works. So while I was leveling, I actually used Strings of Kriarion alongside of Arctic Spear up to most of the way through Act 2, and the reason for this is that it's a cheaper rage spender that still puts out pretty good damage and also scales with projectiles. And effectively you can constantly cast your Arctic Spears while constantly attacking with Strings of Kriarion, and the resource balances out quite well with a little bit of other spell weaving in between. In the early game, I actually invested into agility to make that early game section smoother, because having a bit of attack and cast speed early on is quite helpful, but I pretty soon respec'd into ferocity once I started to realize just how strong crit and crit damage is in this game for scaling. I've mostly invested into ferocity, with just a few points into toughness to get myself just enough health that I feel like I'm pretty stable. Before we go into the skills and stuff, I actually want to go through the passive skill tree, because some of this stuff is really fundamental to how the build works. So in the early game, as I said, I was investing into attack speed, so I did pick up Backline Raider, and I still have it just to give a little bit more general fluidity to the character, but it's pretty unnecessary, so you could drop Backline Raider attack speed if you want, because the attack speed doesn't do too much for us overall. The most important routing early on will be to head out this way, and I rotated the rings around to match up Warlock and the Time Weaver in this arrangement here. So early on you can scoot out this way, or you can come through here like I've done. I ended up respecing to make the point distribution a little bit more efficient, but effectively we head into Residual Energy, and this one is incredibly powerful. It says that attacks gain 30% damage from the last spell cast, the type being based on the spell. And what this actually does is adds flat damage based on the spell. So if we open up our weapon damage here and scroll up, we can see our flat damage. All of these are all just different flat damages to our attacks, right? So these are all being added to either Strings or Havoc or whatever attack you're using at the time. And if I cast an Arctic Spear, take a look at the frost damage. It goes up to 300 to 600 basically. So it's a huge amount of added damage, and you can see that reflected in the skills tooltip as well, where it says average damage 825. We cast a spell and it goes up to almost 1200. So it's an absolutely massive damage increase, that node right there. For pathing, I opted to go through Duty to Exterminate rather than going through minor nodes, because the extra max willpower and rage is not a really bad deal for burst damage overall. Now let's get into some of the most powerful mechanics in the entire skill tree that this build takes full advantage of. The first one being the insane Witch Time Cannot Heal. What this does is if enemies are afflicted by a stasis, they take 100% of the hit damage again after a 1.5 second delay. So what this means is if you stasis an enemy, and we have many ways of stasising an enemy in this build, they will just basically double your damage. They'll take that damage again. Now, it's not exactly that damage. What the game actually does is it simulates another hit of that exact type happening again. So the damage ranges, but it's effectively the same as you just having attacked the enemy again. So you're doubling all of your attacks and all of your spell hits. And that works for basically everything we use as well. From the Arctic Spears to the Strings of Kriarion. I'm pretty sure it even works for things like Anomaly and Bulwark as well, because they do work as hit damage. You can also get Deferential Wounds here to increase that damage by a further 20%, making it even spicier. So this one is absolutely insane. So this one's pretty fundamental, so I'll jump back out here for a second because this is pretty important to how we spec our skills. We try to get a little bit of ailment application, and early on I invested in wisdom, but later on I found it wasn't really necessary. You want to try and get around 10% chance to apply stasis, which is based on aether damage over here. If I mouse over my aether damage stasis chance score here, you can see I'm sitting around 10.4%, and that's pretty much enough for this to work. Because Anomaly is built-in aether damage, unless you're stacking a ton of another damage to added spells, like Cold or something like that, the anomalies will hit enemies rapidly and apply the stasis quite effectively. And the other really important thing is that you can have basically on-demand stasis whenever you need it from the Aether Jump teleportation skill. So this one here applies stasis to any enemies at the beginning and the end of the teleport. So if you're either near the enemy and you teleport away, or you teleport onto the enemy, that pulse there applies stasis to all of those enemies for a few seconds so that you can then effectively double your damage. So it's pretty insane stuff. Long term, you could optimize further by adding enough stasis damage to your attacks and spells that most of your other attacks and spells will also apply stasis, but it's not really even that necessary. So this one is insane, and I think a lot of builds are going to take advantage of this, as so long as they can get a decent stasis applicator, which doesn't seem too difficult to do. We then also take advantage of Dire Junction, one of the stronger defensive mechanics in the game. Absolutely insane this thing is. And what this does is when you take a hit, say you take 1,000 damage, you only take 40% of that hit initially, so you take 400 damage, and then the remaining 60% of that hit is dealt 1 second later. Now, that doesn't really reduce the amount of damage you take overall, right? You're still taking the same total damage. And this does have a drawback of lowering your effective health by effectively 10% once you get the node behind it. But why this is really important is because you're going to have constant healing going on while you're taking damage. So instead of taking 2,000 damage and getting one shot, or however much damage and getting one shot, the damage is split almost in half, and then what happens is you have a chance to heal before the remainder of the damage is dealt to you. Now, the way Leech works in this game, and Leech is pretty important because you're going to be constantly attacking and dealing damage, whether it's with Arctic Spear while you're moving around, or your attacks and your other spells. Leech damage applies on the next tick of regen. So if we go into the defensive tree here, we can see our regeneration rate is 0.9. You can actually scale this to make it happen more rapidly as well. But 0.9, so this is less than a second. So as long as you're actively attacking monsters, you're going to be healing before you take the rest of that damage. So you're extending your health pool dramatically without any extra investment because of that node. So incredibly powerful defensive mechanic. What's more, if you have things like dodge or block or anything like that, you could potentially mitigate any other incoming hits in the meantime, giving you more chance to heal up. The other thing is health regeneration will also help you heal. You can also spam potions. If you notice you take damage, take a big hit of damage, health goes down to half. You know that another big hit of damage is following up in 1 second. You have 1 second to react with flasks, which is often enough time to save you. And then the other thing is we do have Bulwark of Dawn on this character, so whenever this is on our character and I try to keep it up during any tough fights, we're constantly healing a very large amount of life. I don't actually know how much life it heals, but it's pretty chunky amounts, several hundred at least, and often enough to save you as well. So huge survivability boost from Dire Junction in this node, and we do capitalize on that a little further with some of the other things in the tree. Late game, once you start to get some dodge on gear, so you actually need dodge affixes on gear. So I should have some floating around here somewhere. I have a bit, and I certainly can get a lot more, but see this 38 dodge chance score here? You want to get long-term as much of this as possible, and then we can scale that up with the dodge increase node. Now, this node doesn't do anything if you don't have any dodge on gear, so don't get it early game. Get it later on once you've got some nice items that do have dodge on them, and it'll be a priority defensive stat long-term. But even if we only get like something, say 20% dodge, this will effectively double it after we do take a hit, putting up to 40%, giving us more time to heal before we take any more damage. So very, very nice stuff. And this synergizes quite nicely with another very, very powerful mechanic, defensively speaking, branded burst over here. So every time as you don't take damage over time, you'll gain tenet points, and these stack up to 5. And with this node behind it, they provide 20% damage reduction, assuming that's how the math works on this one. It's never really fully clear. As you can see, I got 5 stacks right here. Each one of those reduces damage taken by 20% for 100% reduced damage taken. So the first damage we take after these are fully stacked up, we'll take no damage from, and then they'll start stacking up again. And things like dodge and just, good play, avoiding enemy incoming damage, will help these points build back up. But even if you're not at 5 stacks, still having 1 or 2 points built up before you take another hit reduces damage by 20-40%, which is a very significant amount of defense. For the rest of the tree, we invest into Safe From Afar because it's reasonable damage scaling. It's not an insane node. You can probably drop it if you want to, But this node right here is a little secret node. +1 PS to projectiles is fantastic, and you do want to try and pick this up early. And that's not a bad idea for your early game to basically just route through the attack speed, come out here and grab the +1 projectile, and then route around this way to get the added damage, and then get your stasis and your dire juncture and things like that in terms of pathing. But that +1 projectile PS is very nice. It allows you to just get a little bit more reach, a little bit more AoE clear, hit bosses that might have, when there might have been like a trash monster blocking the damage potentially. So pretty nice stuff overall. And then we take Archeon's Teaching. The damage debuff on it seems pretty bad, but it's actually really not very bad at all. I'm pretty sure it's just like reduced damage rather than like a less multiplier. So it adds an extra projectile, and you can shotgun in this game. So you can see I'm shooting 2 Arctic Spears because of that instead of 1. And if I'm close enough to the monster, where these would both hit the target, they'll both do the damage as well. So you can shotgun in this game. And the same thing goes for Strings and later Havoc Orb once you get the missiles. And that's another reason why the missiles on Havoc Orb in particular are really good, because they do shotgun and provide a bit, and still give you a nice AoE damage overlap when they do eventually explode as well. As for other parts of the tree, I mentioned earlier, crit is very strong in this game, so we do get some crit scaling. This node here, for 60% crit score, is not bad, and on the way is all crit damage, so that's a lot of damage right there, so these nodes are super worthwhile. And then we do come out this way to come up and grab a bunch of crit chance on the way to 100% increased crit damage, minus 30% damage. I don't know if that is reduced or like a less multiplier, but I suspect that actually might just be reduced damage. So your non-crits deal a little bit less damage, but it's not much at all, and you barely even notice that. And then you get a whopping massive amount of crit damage. At the moment, I'm sitting around, with weapons at least, it varies from weapons to spell a little bit depending on your gearing, but almost 50% crit chance and 348% crit damage, which is a huge multiplier to our damage and very, very effective. And you probably want to pick this node up once you've got around 40-ish% crit chance. Before then, it might not be quite as good, but still probably worth getting. In terms of some golds for the build, I definitely want to go up and pick up the active dodge, so I'm heading up to get that now. It's pretty nice survivability, being able to dodge roll through enemies, so that's not too bad at all, and there's a little bit of health and stuff on the way, which isn't a problem. And I'll probably also get the all projectiles PS every target within the 6-meter radius, just for when you're in endgame, there's pretty high density of monsters, so when there's like 40 monsters next to us, it's pretty nice to be able to PS everything nearby, so I'm going to grab that, and there's a bit of crit on the way anyway, so it's not too bad. After that, I'm not yet sure. I'm still deciding what I'll do after that, but we'll try and find some nice other juicy things we could supplement our defenses further. We could get more damage. It depends on what the later endgame has to throw at us, and we'll wait to see how that plays out. But at the moment, this has been very, very incredibly effective. So just let me go over the skills real quick so you know what sort of runes I'm looking at here. In fact, I think I've just gained an extra level on Aether Jump, so I can pick up something here. Maybe I'll just reduce the willpower cost or something. Not a big deal. Predominantly, the most important one is once you get access to it, the completely removed cooldown allows you to spam stasis jump, and this is great for balancing your willpower and rage on demand, because it's one of the fastest ways to spend willpower to generate rage. When you're heading into a boss fight, you want your willpower and rage to be something like this, so that you have enough willpower to cast anomalies and bulwark, so you want maybe a little bit more than that, and slam out your havoc orbs while slamming out your spears like this and holding down both buttons basically for huge burst damage. That's how we burst down bosses, so it's pretty helpful to be able to Aether Jump towards the boss, plus it allows you to easily apply stasis whenever you need to. So that's pretty nice. Other ones in here, teleport range, one of these is nice. You don't really need the second one. It already reaches basically the edge of the screen, so I don't know why you'd need two. And then otherwise, this one's okay. It adds a little bit of damage as you pass through enemies. It's not really a big deal. Predominantly just the inflict stasis is really important, and then the spam ability is the most one, and you can later on get crowd control removal too. For Arctic Spear, it looks like I've gained some extra points since I last checked it, so I'll need to check this. This one's currently incorrect. It doesn't actually do crit damage, so don't get that. But the extra projectile thing is kind of okay, but I've mostly just tried to keep the damage as high as possible. I could just go for the ailment. I've played around with the longer creation delay. It's a lot of extra damage, but it is pretty unpleasant to play with compared to the regular setup. So for the most part, I scale up the damage as much as possible. Crit damage and crit chance are fantastic. Reduce the willpower cost a little bit for balancing the resource. I like to just be able to constantly spam this, and I can dump resource with Anomaly and Aether Jump whenever I need to, and just basically just damage and crit for the most part. For this one here, I've also got points to spend on these, so I can optimize these a little bit further. Ailment damage is not very useful for us. Enemies' damage when they're pulled in is not too shabby. I could get the projectiles are destroyed, though it does have a cooldown reduction, which is a little bit unfortunate. I might just go for the extra hit of damage as they're pulled in. So increase the area of effect of the damaging vortex is nice because you're using this to kill a lot of trash monsters. It groups them up and kills them really effectively. Does a ton of damage, this skill. Increasing the damage further, why not? Duration's fantastic. And crit chance and crit damage, obviously. And then this one's probably the most important modifier once you gain access to this, and you might even want to rush for this if you want to invest a bit of extra resource into leveling it up at the skill vendor. Being able to cast it twice is incredible because you can just extend it so much further. Also, I'm like 90% sure that it stacks as well. Like you can stack up 2 in the same spot, and it basically doubles the damage as well. So that's pretty strong. Bulwark of Dawn's another fantastic one. I still have a lot more of these. Maybe I'll go for the reducible power cost. Increased duration, fantastic. Area of effect deals damage. Get this as soon as possible. Actually does a ton of damage and is fantastic for leveling. You can just like drop it on a pack and keep running. And later on, it'll stick to you, acting like a area of effect damage around your character. And then this one, because we are a hybrid attack spell build, attacks deal sacred damage whilst inside the area of effect. And it actually adds quite a bit of sacred damage as well. So if I cast it and then Arctic Spear, so that I don't throw it off with the other mechanic, we've got 50 to 100 extra sacred damage, and any added flight damage is good damage in this game, so that's quite strong. So, reducing willpower cost, the buff to resistances later you can get as well, and then this one here is really nice. It makes it follow your character, which is obviously a huge enhancement to the skill because it means all of the buffs, the resists, the damage, and the damage to nearby enemies stays with your character, and it's just fantastic. As I was talking about earlier, it's a big boost to your survivability. And then Strings of Kriarion earlier was basically just spec'd for raw damage. You can... I tried the extra projectiles, but the rage cost was a bit too high early on. Later, I'll tell you in gearing how we deal with that. But for the most part, reducing the rage cost, increasing the damage. You can get like ailments, but mostly just like crit chance and crit damage. So just pretty much raw damage. As for Havoc Orb, which looks like I also have another point to spend, so I'll just go for some AoE, I suppose, for clearing. The most important thing is the missiles. The grenades have a minimum targeting range, and even if you get the rune that reduces that, there's kind of a dead spot next to your character unless you also stack the AoE. But the most important thing is this way these function as a projectile that can pierce, so you can deal a lot of like shotgunning damage to bosses, whereas it's a little bit harder to do with the grenades. And also the missiles just do a huge amount of damage at the cost of a tiny bit of AoE, so the AoE loss is negligible. And it's like tiny, it goes from 4 to 3.5 meters, and it's a huge damage boost, a massive damage boost. So the missiles are insane, so you definitely want the missiles. And then crit chance, additional projectile is worth the damage loss in my opinion, provides a lot more AoE, and you can still shotgun, so you still gain a lot of damage from that. And then crit damage, and just this is a pretty big damage node as well, so you'll be getting that on top of that. As for gearing is concerned, we are a pistol and a catalyst. Catalyst is what enables the spell casting, so it's important. On the implicit transfer time reduction, this is actually a drawback, how it's minus transfer time reduction, so it actually makes your resource balancing slower, and this is an important mechanic when it comes to gearing. So you want as low as possible. Some of them will go up to 70% reduction, minus reduction. You want like 50-ish% if you can get that. Otherwise, added damage to spells, crit hit damage is fantastic, and if you can get any sort of like ailment chance for aether damage or occult ailment chance or anything like that, then that's going to help as well. If you can roll transfer time reduction on there, then that's fantastic. Support slot 3s, I believe it are, with one of the gems, as you can see here that I've got socketed, has transfer time reduction. Catalysts can roll defensive and support sockets. So if you can get a support socket 3 on there, you can get transfer time reduction on there, and that makes a big difference. Now, what is that? So basically, you'll notice that as I'm spending my skills, a part of the bar is being like grayed out. And what that is effectively a bottlenecking, because the bar can only move back and forth so fast. So transfer rate increases that or decreases that depending on whether it's positive or negative. So you want positive transfer rate reduction, just to be clear again. So as you can see, I've actually stacked that wherever possible on support socket 3. So like on this ring here, and one here, and then I've rolled that on gear where I can as well. So like these pants have it as well. So if you can get a few stacks of that, that's what enables the use of Havoc Orb. So early on, you'll be stuck with strings for a while until you can get maybe 2 or 3 of those modifiers. And once you have those modifiers, things start to get a lot smoother for a very spendy skill like Havoc Orb. Also, as your damage goes up, things will get better too. For your pistol, you just want a ton of added flat damage because it's super, super effective in this game. And if you can get crit chance or crit damage, that's also fantastic. And it's also a slot in which you can get some leech. So this is a legendary rare right here that has a lot of damage and leech. Sockets are also really important. You can roll socket type 1s and 2s, which apply attack or spell damage, and you mostly just want to throw Aether damage on it so you don't throw off your chance to inflict stasis, and we do scale Aether damage a little bit better. So this is an example of a very good pistol that I found yesterday, so if you can find a rare that's even half as good as this, you're banging. As for your other gear, move speed on boots is fantastic to get. Mostly for the base types, you're looking for health and resistances across the board. High health resist makes a big difference. Force armor is not really important in this build at all, so don't really try and get that. You're better off getting health resist gear wherever possible. And ferocity gear is pretty nice as well if you can get that. I've also got a bit of rage and willpower cost reduction on gear. I prioritize that a little bit because it does help overall with like balancing out the resources and just having a fair bit more burst for however much rage or willpower you've built up. It helps with managing it a bit more, so it's not bad to get a little bit of that like I have on this pair of gloves. Toughness, health, increases to flat resistance score, resistance scaling, all that sort of stuff is good. You don't really need to worry about attack speed too much. Crit damage is very important across the board. So taking a look, you can see I've just got a lot of health on this. This one is a little bit of... The percentage damages don't do a lot in this game because you already have so much percentage damage. I mean, if you look at your character sheet, I have 400% increased damage. So adding 20% increased occult damage to that doesn't really do much. So that's not a priority. Mostly I'm using this one because it's got cost reduction and it's got a lot of resist. So just a pretty nice solid shoulder right there. And cooldown reduction is also quite nice for spamming your anomalies. So if you can get that, I would like to get a bit more cooldown reduction. It's from my testing of the cooldown reduction, it's maybe not as good as what it says numerically or what you'd expect, but it's still pretty nice to get. And of course, health over there. And the added damage slots are really important, so you can get added damage on rings, your weapon, your catalyst, and your amulet. You want to get added damage wherever possible. So as you can see, I've got triple added damage here, and then crit damage is the next highest priority for damage scaling. And I've also got some occult status ailment chance. This is a very nice amulet. This ring here is particularly insane. Now, you can't get items like this one until Endgame. The Endgame fully upgraded and fully juiced expeditions have a scoring system, and if you get an S+ ranking, you'll get some nice gear at the end. And some of those items can have special modifiers on them. The final modifier on this item, attacks gain 14% damage from the last spell cast, type is based on the spell. Sounds familiar, right? That's a special modifier you can only get in Endgame, but once you can get it, that is a high chase stat, because that is huge. It is the exact same mechanic as this. So instead of adding just 30% damage from the last spell cast, we now add 44% increase damage from the last spell cast. So absolutely insane one. It's like having another like 3 added damage mods on the jewelry. So very strong stuff there overall. I also found an Alamali's Lucky Belt. Magic find, generally kind of nice. Bit of dodge chance attributes and crit. Not too shabby, but belts can also have added damage on them, so if you don't find something like this, then use an added damage belt. You can also get a socket on normal ones. I couldn't socket this for whatever reason, which you can, it's a support socket, so you can add another transfer time reduction on that. And I think that just about covers it. So anyway, folks, I think that covers everything. But if you do have any questions about how the build works, or maybe some ideas of where we can take it and how we can enhance things further, I'm going to keep playing this character and pushing it further into endgame and fleshing it out. Maybe we can make it even more busted. But that is it for now, though. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.